In the video about ID selectors in CSS, we were first introduced to the idea of compound selectors. And what I want to do is I want to take a moment in this video to really break down compound selectors so that we really understand how they work and what they do for us. So let's jump back to our navigation CSS that we just added. In this example, we used an unordered list with the ID of main navigation. In other words, we restricted the list of unordered lists that come back from this UL selector to only the unordered list that has the ID of main nav. Now, this is a compound selector in that we are using a regular type selector in conjunction with an ID selector right here, and we are saying, as already explained, that we are looking for the UL, or the unordered list, that has this particular main nav value inside of its ID attribute. And that makes it a compound selector. We can also use an ID selector by itself, just like we can with a class selector. So we can say main nav, and then in here we can do something like color purple, and that would then make the color purple within an element that has the ID main nav. So let's go back to our HTML. We'll see that it's still white right here, but if we select that element, we will see that the color purple is overridden in this main nav by the color up here of white that is given to the A in the inheritance hierarchy of our styles. But you do see that we are applying a style using just the ID selector. So using a compound selector, in other words, using the unordered list and then defining that on that list it has to have the main nav ID, we've done a compound selector. Now down here, we've got additional compound selectors where there is a space between this first compound selector, which is using the ID and the UL, to where we are now looking for child elements that belong to the first selector. So let me break that down for you. Inside of our visual hierarchy, we do have an unordered list right here. It has the ID main nav, which is what we're asking for right here, is a UL with that ID. And then because there's a space right here and then another type selector, this tells CSS, all right, so out of the results set we got from this, which in this case is just this single UL right here, find all of the list items inside of this result set, and then let's apply the style to all of those list items. So if we're going to think about it this way, the first selector, which is the UL, let's do it the right way, UL pound main nav, this particular, that's not a good color. Why did it go to black when I have it set to orange? Let's use yellow instead. All right, so let's do this. We've got UL $main dash nav. Okay, so this right here locates this HTML element. And then in our compound selector, it then asks us, once we've got this result set, then it asks us to find all of the LI or list items in that result set. So then it goes and it identifies, oops, I grabbed the wrong thing here. We want this one. Then it identifies all list items inside of this particular element, the one that this selector found, which ends up being this UL. So then it says, find me all the list items that live inside of UL pound main nav. Okay, So that gives us this LI. And that brings back all LIs that live inside of this item. Being that there's only one, it comes back with just that LI, and then we get this particular style applied to it, which is the float left. Now we can get more complex in our compound selectors with this one right here. And let's go ahead and break down how that one works. It's very similar to what we had before. Let's do that really quick. So we're going to go with our text in yellow and our selector. Let's start up here so we've got more room. It says find us all UL items and find us that UL item that has an ID of main-nav. So when that happens, it finds this HTML element. The next part of that compound selector was find me all of the list items that live inside of that, of the last selector, which means it says refer to this guy and then find me all of the LIs that live inside of it. And then the next part of our compound selector was now find me all anchor tags that live inside of those results that came back. So now it's referring back to this result set from the last HTML select. So first it selects the UL, then it finds all list items inside of that UL. And now it says inside of all of those list items, get me back all of the A tags or all of the anchor tags, and then let's apply a style to it. So you can see how it kind of compounds, and each sub or child selector that we have inside of this compound selector refers back to what came back from the previous selector. And hopefully that helps you understand how compound selectors work. So let's jump back to the next compound selector, which is this one right here. Very similar to what we just did, only now we have a pseudo selector right here, which is a pseudo class, is what it's really actually called. And this one says the hover state. And when we see that in the HTML, when we hover over the home, the background color changes from this lighter gray to a much darker, almost black gray, as you can see right there. So this is a pseudo class selector where it only affects a state of an HTML element, and in this case, it's the hover state. So let's go back and break down this one right here in our HTML. We'll do this one more time just to make sure that we've really got this down. So UL, and limit it to only those that have an ID of main-nav, which should only be 1. It pulls back this HTML element. The next part of the selector says, let's pull back all list items. And as we've seen, it goes back to this set, which brought back just this one UL, this one right here. And then it says, find me all child elements that are LI. And then the next part of the selector was the anchor tags. So it refers back to all the list items that were brought back in this selector. And then says, find me all the anchor tags that were in those. And then it says, hey, for all those anchor tags, find me the hover state of all those anchor tags, and then let's make sure that when they get hovered on, it changes to black. So it's going to go back to the set of anchor tags, and then it's going to go ahead and when in hover, let's set it to that darker gray, almost black color. So hopefully with this, you really understand how the compound selectors work, and this should help you out in trying to compose more complex CSS styles in order to accomplish the effects or the visual look and feel that you're after for your website.